Would you still sing if the whole room was laughing at you? That question haunted Eli Walker for years. It wasn't just a memory, it was a wound. Because he had stood there once under golden lights that felt like interrogation lamps, facing faces twisted in amusement, cruelty, indifference. All he had was his voice, a cracked, trembling thread of hope stretching over the jaws of humiliation. He didn't sing for applause. He sang for his sister's life, for air in her lungs, for one more sunrise. And that night something unimaginable happened. You think you know where this story goes. A poor boy with a beautiful voice, a rich man with a broken past, a song that changed everything. But what if I told you that wasn't the most shocking part? Stay with me, because in the next few minutes you'll witness a choice that will test everything. Trust, pride, forgiveness, and love. And by the time it's over, you might just find yourself asking, what would I have done? The wind that evening bit harder than usual in downtown Boston. The skyline glimmered in gold, but for Eli Walker, the 10-year-old boy standing barefoot outside the towering glass windows of Whitestone Grill, the world might as well have been made of ice. His stomach ached from emptiness, but it wasn't hunger that hollowed his chest, it was fear. Real fear. The kind that sinks in when you've heard your little sister gasping for air all night, and you know that the pharmacy just turned you away because you didn't have enough to pay for her medicine. Eli's hands were tucked deep in his pockets, gripping the crumpled prescription like it was a lifeline. Behind him, the Riverside district stretched in darkness, a forgotten corner of the city full of cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows. His mother Grace waited at home blind and worried, and his 6-year-old sister Lily was growing paler by the hour, her chest wheezing like an old accordion. The inhalers weren't enough anymore. The doctor said she needed a new medication and fast, but the world didn't care. Not when you were a kid who smelled like mildew and dirt standing outside places that sold bottles of wine worth more than your rent. Eli didn't beg. He didn't know how. He just watched, nose nearly pressed to the frosted glass eyes tracing the laughter, the plates of food that looked like art, the warmth he could never touch, until someone touched him. "Hey, rat kid," a voice barked. Eli flinched and turned. A group of well-dressed young men in their 20s had just walked out of the restaurant reeking of cologne power and entitlement. At the center stood Brandon Cole, slicked hair, expensive coat, and the smile of someone who'd never heard the word no. "Well, would you look at that," Brandon said, his voice oozing sarcasm, a little street ghost peeking through the window. "You hungry, huh?" Eli looked away, hoping to disappear, but Brandon wasn't done. "I asked you a question, kid." He stepped closer, his voice lowering with theatrical pity. "Tell you what, I'm feeling generous tonight. Come in. Sing us a song. If you impress us, I'll buy you the best meal on the menu. Hell, maybe even toss you a few bucks for your sob story. But if you're boring, you leave with nothing, not even the crumbs." His friends laughed. One of them even clapped mockingly. A waiter standing at the door hesitated, looking uncomfortable, but didn't move. Power had a way of silencing people. Eli's face flushed red. His fists clenched inside his coat pockets. Every cell in his body screamed for him to run. Humiliation wrapped around him like cold steel. But then he saw it again. Lily, her cracked lips, the way she curled into herself when the coughing got too bad, her tiny voice begging him to stay by her bed. He had promised her. He looked Brandon square in the eye, and though his voice came out low, it was steady. "I'll do it." Brandon lit up like someone just handed him the controls to a puppet. "Perfect. Let's give Boston a show." The Whitestone Grill was a cathedral of luxury. Warm lights glowed from chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars. Silverware clinked in elegant rhythm, and laughter spilled from polished mouths over $1,000 steaks. The moment Eli stepped in, the world stopped to gawk. Heads turned. Whispers buzzed. "Who let that in here?" The maitre d' started forward in protest, but Brandon raised a dismissive hand. "He's with me. He's entertainment." A hush fell as Brandon cleared a small space by the grand piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced theatrically, "tonight's special performance, Boston's very own street bird. Come on, little nightingale. Sing." Eli stood frozen. Dozens of faces bore down on him, some amused, some indifferent, others cruel. His throat was dry. His body trembled. Was he really about to do this? For food? For scraps for pride? No, not for any of that. For Lily. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sneers, the silver and silk. He pictured his sister's face, his mother's hands weaving baskets in the dark. And then he opened his mouth and sang. It wasn't a pop song. It wasn't trendy. It was a lullaby his mother used to hum when Lily couldn't sleep. An old Appalachian tune about the moon watching over lonely children and promising them a dawn that would always come. The moment the first note left his lips, something changed. It cut through the chatter, the whine, the brittle glass world. The room fell into silence so sudden it felt like a gasp. His voice wasn't loud, but it was pure. So heartbreakingly pure that even Brandon's smug grin faltered. At the corner booth, a man sat alone, older in a dark coat, his cane resting against the table. Henry Whitmore hadn't touched his dinner. He had been watching everything, ready to leave in disgust at the cruelty. But that voice, that song, his late son James had played that lullaby at his last recital. His heart ached. Eli sang with his fists at his sides, trembling, his eyes still closed. Each word carried weight of poverty, of love, of desperation, of dreams buried under city noise and broken promises. The moment he finished, the silence that followed was holy. No one moved. Then a slow, deliberate clap broke the stillness. Henry Whitmore rose to his feet, his eyes glistening. Others followed. In seconds, the room erupted into a standing ovation. The same crowd that moments ago mocked his presence now applauded like their souls had been stirred. Eli opened his eyes, bewildered. He didn't understand. And then Henry stepped forward. He knelt painfully in front of the trembling boy. "What's your name, son?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Eli," he whispered. Henry nodded slowly. Eli. Where on earth did that voice come from? And in that question hung the weight of something much, much bigger than applause. The story was just beginning. We're so sorry to pause here, but what would you have done if you were in Eli's shoes, sing in front of strangers, or walk away in shame? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, please like and show your support. We'll be back soon with the next chapter of Eli's journey. The applause had faded, but the echo of Eli's voice still hung in the air, like the final shimmer of a bell. He stood motionless under the glow of the chandelier, his chest rising and falling, unsure if he was still dreaming. Moments ago, he had been just a boy from Riverside District, a ghost in the shadows. Now he stood face to face with Henry Whitmore, a man whose name was whispered in music halls and industry boardrooms alike. Henry's hand rested gently on Eli's shoulder, steadying him as much as honoring him. Then, with the grace of someone who had spent his life around stages, he turned to the crowd and said, "This boy is not a beggar. He's a gift." And with that, the story took its first step toward changing all their lives. Later that night, under a velvet black sky, Henry's chauffeured town car rolled slowly through the pothole-riddled streets of Riverside. Eli sat stiffly in the leather seat, clutching the basket of food Henry had insisted the chef pack for his family. He'd never seen so many lights on a dashboard before. He kept glancing sideways at Henry, who sat beside him in silence, his eyes distant as if wrestling ghosts of his own. When they finally pulled up in front of the crumbling brick building Eli called home, Henry hesitated before stepping out. "You live here?" he asked softly. Eli nodded, already halfway out the door, sprinting toward the staircase. "Mama, I'm back inside." Grace Walker sat on the edge of her cot, blind eyes turned toward the sound of his voice. "Eli," she called out, her voice cracked with worry. "Where were you, baby? I've been going mad. I brought food." "Real food," he said breathlessly. "And someone you need to meet?" Henry stepped through the door, and instantly the space felt too small for his presence. He removed his coat and hat, but even stripped of formality, he carried the weight of wealth and something heavier, grief. Grace stood, her hands reaching toward him on instinct. Who are you?" Henry gently took her hands and bowed his head. "My name is Henry Whitmore. Your son saved something in me tonight, and I'd like to return the favor." Grace's body stiffened. "We don't accept charity. It's not charity," Henry said. "It's a promise." Before Grace could answer, a sharp coughing echoed from the corner. Henry turned and saw Lily curled on a worn mattress, her little frame shaking uncontrollably, each breath a rasping whistle. Her lips were pale blue. That was the moment everything else fell away. "We need a doctor," Henry said urgently. "We already tried," Grace replied quietly, tears streaking down her cheeks. "They said unless we had the new prescription, there was nothing more they could do. And that medicine—" Her voice broke. Henry didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my physician. He's the best in the state." Less than an hour later, the small apartment transformed into a field clinic. Dr. Stephen Rhodes arrived with 2 nurses carrying equipment that barely fit through the doorway. He didn't comment on the surroundings, just got to work. Eli sat clutching his mother's hand as the machines beeped and pulsed, measuring Lily's breath, her oxygen levels, her heart. When Dr. Rhodes finally stepped aside, his face was grave. "She needs to be hospitalized, immediately. This is not simple asthma. Her symptoms suggest a congenital heart defect, possibly pulmonary hypertension or cystic fibrosis. She's been misdiagnosed for years." Grace gasped. Eli stared at the doctor, his heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. "Can you save her?" he whispered. "We can try," Dr. Rhodes said, "but she'll need surgery. Soon." Henry placed a hand on Eli's shoulder again, firmer this time. "I'll take care of it." Everything. But it wasn't that simple. The next morning, as sunlight bled through torn curtains, Grace pulled Eli aside. Her lips trembled. "We can't accept this, Eli. It's too much. No one gives something so big without asking something in return." "He doesn't want anything," Eli whispered. "He lost his son. He's just trying to help." "No," she said, shaking her head. "He's a powerful man. Powerful men don't just appear in your life out of nowhere and hand you miracles." Eli stood there, torn between love and fear, between survival and pride, and then he fell to his knees. "Mama, please. I'm begging you. Just this once, let someone help us. I already failed once when I couldn't get the medicine. Don't let me lose her too." Her eyes welled, but she said nothing. Not then. That afternoon, Henry returned with a wheelchair van and a private nurse. "We're taking Lily and Grace to St. Jude Medical Center. I've arranged for a pediatric cardiac team to be on standby." Grace tried to protest again, her voice cracking. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" Henry didn't flinch. He knelt in front of her, his hand gently covering hers. "I once had a son who played piano like the world was made of music. He died before I ever really heard him. And last night your boy sang and shook me awake. So if you're asking what I want to hear that kind of beauty again. I want to save something this time." She didn't speak, but she cried and didn't stop him when he helped her into the van. As they drove toward the hospital, Eli sat in the front seat watching Boston blur past, feeling the world tilt beneath his feet. For the first time in his life, he wasn't moving away from hope. He was racing toward it, but he had no idea how many battles still lay ahead. "We're so sorry to pause here, but if you were in Eli's place, would you have trusted a stranger with everything you loved or walked away to protect your pride? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking and sharing. Your voice matters." The halls of St. Jude Medical Center smelled like bleach and hope. Eli sat curled in the armchair outside the operating room, his legs tucked under him, gripping the small silver tuning fork Mr. Whitmore had given him. It belonged to James Henry's son, the boy who never got to play his final concert. That fork now rested in Eli's palm like a quiet promise passed between the living and the lost. Inside the operating room, surgeons worked tirelessly to repair Lily's heart. Machines beeped in measured rhythms. Henry sat beside Grace, who clutched her rosary and whispered prayers through trembling lips. Eli couldn't pray. He couldn't speak. His throat felt closed, like it had forgotten how to move without his sister's laughter nearby. When the door finally opened and the surgeon stepped out, time seemed to suspend. His green scrubs were soaked in effort, but his eyes held the answer. "The surgery was a success," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Your daughter is a fighter." Eli exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Grace collapsed into Henry's arms, her rosary falling from her hand. Eli stood frozen, unable to cry, unable to speak, just breathing, just holding on. The next few days passed in a blur of cautious smiles and whispered relief. Lily slowly opened her eyes. Her first words were barely audible, but Eli heard them as clearly as any song. "Sing to me," and so he did. In the quiet of the ICU, with machines humming and nurses bustling in and out, Eli sang the lullaby their mother had once sung to them. His voice was raw, fragile, but filled with something unbreakable. Love. It didn't end there. Henry kept his promise. Not just to Eli, but to himself. He moved the Walker family into a small house on the north edge of Boston, a place with a backyard sunlight and enough space for Grace to breathe and Lily to run. The walls were painted in soft pastels. The kitchen had a radio that Eli would sometimes sing along to. The world no longer looked like it was built to crush them. It looked for the first time like it had room for them in it. And then came the letters, music schools, conservatories, invitations. But the most unexpected guest was Isabella Cole. She arrived one rainy afternoon clutching a bouquet of flowers she didn't know how to offer. She had been the woman in the restaurant that night, the one Eli unknowingly sang for while she lay unconscious after collapsing. Her father, Richard Cole, was the tycoon behind the plan to demolish Riverside District. "I came to say thank you," she said, her voice shaky. "And I came to say I'm sorry." Eli didn't trust her at first. Neither did Grace. But Isabella kept returning. She sat beside Grace in the garden, listening to stories about life before the darkness. She read newspapers out loud, helped Lily with her schoolwork, and stayed late into the evenings just to listen to Eli sing. And one evening, in a rare moment of silence, she told them the truth. "I was born in a place like Riverside," she confessed. "I clawed my way out and promised I'd never look back. But when I did, I became something I swore I'd never be. Someone who forgets." Grace reached across the table and gently held her hand. "But you remembered. That's what matters." A month later, Isabella shocked the board of her father's company. She halted the Riverside redevelopment project and proposed a new one, a community restoration plan. Clinics, schools, housing, property rights for longtime residents. Her father called her mad. She called it redemption. Henry watched it all with quiet pride. He never tried to guide her. He had learned that the most powerful transformations happen when no one is forcing them. As for Eli, he blossomed. Henry founded a music scholarship in his late son's name. The first recipient was Eli Walker. Years passed. The boy who once sang for dinner now stood beneath the bright lights of the Boston Symphony Hall. It was his debut performance, sold out. Critics and producers filled the velvet seats. But in the front row sat the only audience that ever truly mattered, Grace, Lily, Henry, and Isabella. Eli stepped to the microphone dressed in a black suit that still felt too fancy. The applause greeted him like old friends. But before he began, he raised a hand. "I want to sing one more song," he said. "The first song I ever learned. I sang it in desperation. Tonight I sing it in gratitude." He closed his eyes and began. No accompaniment, no orchestra, just his voice, soft, strong, glowing with life. The lullaby rose once again into the air, not as a cry for help, but as a celebration of second chances, of found family, of healing. When the last note faded, the audience didn't move. For one long, sacred moment, they simply breathed. And then they rose. A standing ovation, applause, tears, hope. That night, Henry turned to Grace and whispered, "I finally heard the music I was meant to hear." And she, smiling, replied, "We all did." Now let me ask you, have you ever met someone who entered your life and changed everything without asking for anything in return? If you were Grace, would you have trusted Henry, or would fear have closed that door forever? We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this story? If it touched you, comment no, 3. If it felt just at okay, comment no, 2. And if you're not satisfied, no, 1. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know. Don't forget to send a heart and share this story with someone who needs a little hope today.